All right, thank you. Chantel's my co-author. So I have changed my title slightly from what was submitted, and I put a question mark on the end in terms of a systematic review and synthesis of polar data literature, which I will elaborate on as I go through the presentation. So this presentation came out of actually a conversation that I had with Mark Parsons early this year, or maybe even late last year, about the need to think about planning for the Fifth Polar Data Forum. And I won't go into details of the, International Polar Year, not Polar Data Forum. So the International Polar Year was held 2007 to 2009, major international initiative focused on polar research. And it's a pretty big deal. And some of us in the room were part of the last one, and we're thinking the last time we didn't actually have as much time as we needed to prepare for it from a research or data management perspective. So in this case, I was asking some questions. Do we need some sort of what Tero Mustonen talked about as backcasting, like what has happened in the past, so that could help us in planning for the future? Documenting things like what are some of the priorities that have been around and are still relevant? What have we actually done so we don't reproduce and or reinvent the wheel and think we still need to do that if in fact it's been achieved, which we've had some great achievements in past years in particular. And then also, who should be involved? That was a big one last time, is that we were still figuring out, who's in this community and who should be involved in the conversation. So as I worked with Chantel on this, so the question also came up is, does this need to be not so much just a retrospective or backcasting, but also a dynamic living entity, some sort of process to monitor what's happening because things are changing so rapidly? So those are the drivers. In terms of methods that we're deploying, and it's not a complete systematic review at this stage, but generally, this is the approach we're taking. I'll talk a little bit about what a systematic review is for those of you not familiar. But we're looking at a review of the broader literature, establishing a set of keywords, and I'll talk a little bit about the methodology there. Use of some tools, one in particular called Zotero, who many of you may be familiar with, another called In Vivo, which you may be familiar with. And then there's a question mark around AI. So not there yet, but considering the use of that. I won't read the slide to you, you can do that. But in terms of a systematic literature review, I think the objective there is not just to go out and say, what's out there, but to be answering specific questions. So that's a critical part of a systematic literature review. It's also really focusing on establishing clear search criteria. So with the same sentiment of much of what we do, reproducible science, the idea is that you should be able to hand off your methodology and somebody else should be more or less be able to perform a similar review or the same review and be able to get the similar or same results. So again, it's meant to be as objective as it can be. And it's not really the same, because of that, it's not really the same as just compiling a bibliography or an annotated bibliography. It's more about trying to answer those specific questions in a very specific way. A big part of it that is still ongoing is establishing your keywords or your search criteria. These are just a few examples of some that have been used so far. So this is a bit going into the results section, but it gives you an idea of the diversity of things that you can look for when you're thinking about polar data management or anything related to the Polar Data Forum. And what I'm finding, or what we found so far, is that this is a really important aspect of the project, and it's also a really complex and complicated one that should be likely done with the community to some extent as well. But we have some initial criteria set up, and tools like Google and other citation indices and that help a lot, because they will come up and say, hey, for this search term, here are some other search terms, and so on. Zotero is one of the tools that we've adopted, and for a number of reasons. One, it's just what I'm used to using, but I have used others in the past, like Mendeley and EndNotes and so on. But I like Zotero combined with, I do tend to use Google Scholar, but you could use it with a number of search engines because there's an extension there, so you can directly be finding stuff in Google Scholar and put it directly into Zotero. But the bigger thing there is it's open source, and it can allow you to share with other people who are doing the review. So everybody can be looking at the same library, adding to it, and so on. And then eventually you can publish it publicly. So if you want to share it with the entire community, you can put it out there, and they have nice, easy ways to do that. And so I think that can be a valuable output, even if it's just identifying, the publications, the literature, and so on. Another tool which takes it beyond simply identifying and accessing and downloading is NVivo. So this is a qualitative research software that allows you to manage the publications, but also do things like tagging. So you can come up with, once you've established your sort of not just your search criteria, but different themes that are emerging. It allows you to process those and also do simple things like quickly do word clouds if you want. You can do word frequency lists, all kinds of other things. It's very, very powerful software. We would only be using a small percentage of its power for this type of thing, but it can allow you to really do it in a systematic way, in a way that you can also share with other people. So when people ask, how did you classify this paper, or where did you get that theme out of that paper, you can share that and say, this is exactly how it was done. The downside to this one is it's not open source. It is the most powerful one that I've used. We're starting to see some open source alternatives, but they're not really there yet. It does allow you to share easily, but and if you're at a university, you probably have a license. If not, it's not one of those cheap softwares. So we'll consider that. That leads me also into the next sort of question or thing that we're considering, which is use of AI. Possibly a lot of what you would tend to do in NVivo could be done by AI. But I think there's a big argument to do it manually, at least to start, because we would want to consider things like training, validation. If we're getting results from AI, is this the kind of thing that we as experts would also agree with, and so on? And then if we were going to use AI, would we just try and fine-tune existing LLMs out there? Would we create our own, what's known as RAG, or retrieval augmented generation? We had a presentation on that yesterday. Our own pipeline, or use some other tool where we could add what we call our corpus, or our body of literature, into that, and have the AI try and help us along to identify these themes and so on. So currently considering the different pros and cons there, and then there are other considerations likely as well that I don't have here. Initial results. I'm breaking it down into literature types, so I'll expand a little bit on that. But mostly what you're getting when you're going to something like Google Scholar is peer-reviewed literature, not always. If it has a DOI, it tends to show up there, even if it's not peer-reviewed. But what I'm seeing from the initial evaluation is that there's not a lot in terms of what I call the meta examples, or publications that are about what we do, about building a community, about how do we actually establish approaches to federated data management or data commons and things like that. There's some examples down here of those types of papers. We have some of the authors here in the audience. Those are probably in the tens of publications. I would not certainly see it approaching over 100, and in fact is probably in the low tens of ones that I would consider as seminal or really central articles. But we have many hundreds, or I'd say thousands, that are polar data papers but aren't talking about how we do it as a community. They're just applying methods in their science and reporting back. And we're starting to see a lot of papers. I saw a lot on application of AI, machine learning, and so on, in sea ice concentration, for example, and so on. So those are ones that may have some materials in them that are relevant to us, but are not talking about how we might prepare for the IPY, for example. And I'll talk a little bit more about IPY in a slide or two. But what I found is the gray literature is really important, I think, for this community. We do a lot that's not published in journals. And so if you look at that, I think that's a really rich set of resources. And for international, I think it's richer than the peer review because I come to meetings like this and I know a lot is happening all around the world. We've seen that here, country after country presenting on what they're doing. But if you go to the literature, you're not seeing that. You're tending to see North American, Japan is actually well published, Europe, but maybe not a lot from the rest of the world. So I think if we want to be inclusive of the international community, we want to consider that. Zenodo is a big sort of important resource that's coming. A lot of folks and groups are publishing there. But unfortunately, we all have to slap ourselves. Data archaeology is a big issue. Cannot find the communique for the first Polar Data Forum because the links are dead. The Wayback Engine doesn't have the PDF. It has the link and so on. So we are already losing some of our history there because we're not actually necessarily curating them or storing them. Gray literature types. I'm just mindful of time here, so I'm going to start going through pretty quickly, but we have a lot of different kinds of gray literature, meeting reports, some of which are getting quite old now, but in fact, one of them, the one up here on the left, I shared with the Arctic Data Committee executive, and they're like, wow, this actually has important stuff in it from 2006, and now it's still relevant. So I think it's important to think about that. We have project reports, things like there's an OGC spatial data pilot, I think 100+ page report. A lot of work went into things like that. Other reports, David led one on the Canadian polar data ecosystem, but it links to international. And then where I think we have a really rich resource, but the one that would be data archaeology or publication archaeology are the things like the meeting agendas for meetings like this and all these presentations, which I think are there somewhere, but they would take some effort to access. So looking at what I've looked at so far and Chantel's looked at so far, Chantel's been focusing more on the polar, IPY related stuff, but there's a lot more out there as well. There are a whole lot of themes that are pretty familiar, and I'm just coming from IDW where I went to a number of meetings on the Global Open Research Commons, and it's the whole I have a hammer so everything's a nail. And so I'm saying, wow, all the themes that are in there, which is this global model, seem to emerge when you analyze our literature, and it's everything from the human stuff, which is more around coordination, training, all those types of things, right down through into our open data, which translates into things like standards, semantics, data publication, cloud computing, all of those types of things. So you see that in different sort of levels. And I haven't worked, and we haven't worked yet on the formal analysis. So this is more just manual review, sort of reading through samples of the data and so on, or of the publications. But there's a lot in the way of material there. So just as an overall sort of summary or discussion of it, I've already talked, there's this broad range. Some of it, as I sort of alluded to, is hidden away. So an example that's more personal experience is this group in Canada called PermafrostNet. A lot of stuff is being published under PermafrostNet, but they're doing really amazing things in the data world. But it's not showing up on the search for polar data. You'd need to be searching for permafrost. I am seeing dominance of some nations, so I think we'd have to figure out ways to sort of deal with that. There are many IPY-specific publications, so I think there's quite a bit to draw on, and thanks to the folks who were involved in that, because we have a record there. There's noticeable duplication. So these themes that I showed you in the last slide, you see that again and again and again. So that's where I think AI could help us so that we're not having to read hundreds of papers to just say the same sort of core things, right? Where are we going with IPY5? Mark's going to, I think, have a talk later in the session, and then we have a meeting tomorrow morning. So there are some general things that I think we need to consider if we're considering whether we should have something like this systematic review that's backcasting and forecasting. One is just recognizing this new world order, and it seems like Copilot is pretty it's pretty dire, because I asked Copilot to create an image of the tensions in terms of anti-science and so on, and this is what I came up with. But it's sort of saying, hey, there's tension, there are things that we have to deal with that may change our worlds pretty rapidly, and so we can't just be looking back. We have to be looking forward and dealing with the dynamics. AI ML, of course, is one of those things, and I think that's an opportunity challenge. It was a big topic at IDW last week. And I think there's, Chantal and I were just chatting about it. There's some things that were really probably big issues in the last IPY or even 5 years ago, and we're seeing it here, that may not be an issue in the next IPY because of AI and machine learning. There are things that we can do at scale because of that. The other one is one that Chantal discovered, and this idea of what I just call the super stack, which is this project, which we don't know much about. We don't know much about the proponent, Stefan Holichkai, not sure on the pronunciation there, but this is a proposed system that's going to do everything for Arctic data, and it's a massive stack of technologies and approaches going right from the bottom with blockchain right on through semantics and so on. Not sure if this will happen, but this is the kind of thing that at least this person and maybe some others behind this person are saying, this is going to come in and basically solve the problems of the world. Maybe it will, maybe it won't, I don't know, but this is one where I can't really find much about this person or organization, and do we need to pay attention to that as a community? All right, general consideration, Chantal put these together. We also have to be thinking about, if we're going to have a tool like this, how are we going to get the results to all these different organizations and make sure that we're not just sort of spinning our wheels in our own silo. And so I think that's important. And then just to wrap up, next steps. So one thing is I'd like to discuss, and I think we could do most of this tomorrow morning or some here, but do we even need something like this? Is it worth the effort? Because it is effort, and I think it would be reasonably substantial if we want to keep it up to date and do something that would allow us to keep monitoring. We, I think, would need to work together on these questions for a systematic review or monitoring to make sure we're clear on what we're trying to get out of it. Do we need some sort of working group, small or large? What would the terms of reference be for that working group? And maybe we can chat about that tomorrow or after the session if we don't have time for questions. Thank you to our hosts and so on.
So we do have time for a couple of questions. Anything for Peter? Oh, Shannon's ready.
We can talk about this more tomorrow, but as often as I talk to you two, Peter and Chantal, I hadn't heard about this project very much, and it may be helpful to know. I don't know if you're considering publications per se as part of data, but up until recently, there was the International Polar Year publications database, which had all of the publications from Canada, the UK, and the US. I had been mostly supporting it out of ANA, but the site was very old, very not good. It still included that 1990s flashing code and stuff on the bottom. It was super. I just shut it down, but before I shut it down, I had all of it exported to my servers. So I have copies of everything UK, US, and Canada with permissions from the UK and the US to take it. It was AGC, or American Geophysical Survey, AGS, and SPRI that gave me permission for it. So it's all sitting on Ada's servers should you need it.
All right. Thank you for that. It's not a project yet, so that's what I think we're going to talk about here. And I think a subset of that would be highly relevant. And we probably have some of those from Chantal's work, but it would also be great to have something that's a formal collection to say, what are the data relevant publications or results that came out of IPY?
It's going to be published on Ada, we're going to have an International Polar Year portal on Ada, probably later in 2026.
Okay, great.
Awesome. Yeah, time for one more, and then Taco, sorry, corner Peter, or save it for tomorrow at our IPY workshop.
Hi, I have only a question. How far will this data all go back? We talked on Monday a little bit about, but is this more the new one from the 4th International Polar Year, or is this also going back to the 1st International Polar Year and the years between?
It's a good question. In other work, I've gone right back to the first one in terms of data, but I don't think there's a lot other than pointing to things like the 1959, like the Antarctic Treaty and statements on data, that there's a lot explicitly published about how the data community was working. Although I think we would certainly reference things like establishment of the World Data Centers during that IGY, I guess it was called. So I think that would be in scope, but we're going to have like a long tail or a reduced number of relevant publications for those initial ones. Okay.
Thank you so much, Peter. Please join me in giving Peter another round of applause. Thank you.